Welcome back, America. We're here with America's Governor, Ron DeSantis, my governor, in the great state of Florida. And I have to say, Governor, the people in Florida are very, very happy with you. They just are. I mean, I don't care what the media try or the rhinos try or this one tries or that tries. And people are still flowing into this state, investing in this state, buying homes in this state. They're thrilled to be here. You should be very, very proud of yourself. I don't say that to most politicians, but I know you're taking a lot of hits from the, the peanut stands and so forth, but you should be very proud of what you accomplished here. So having said all that, you're a big supporter of Convention of States. As you know, I've written about it. I'm a big supporter. And the organization, Mark Meckler and Patty, great organization with millions and millions of active members. You support that movement, don't you? And why do you support it?
Well, Mark, I think you pointed out what we've done in Florida, and that was 100% in spite of legacy media constantly smearing us, especially during COVID, as they were saying we were the worst. Everyone was coming to Florida. So people get it, and they see that states like Florida can deliver results. The same has not been the case with the Congress in Washington, D.C. We've just had letdown after letdown for many, many years, and I'm convinced that we're not going to save the country unless we get structural changes in the Constitution to rein in the entrenched politicians in D.C. So there are two ways to amend the Constitution. The first way is the way it's been done traditionally. 2/3 of both houses of the federal Congress send an amendment to the states, or you can do through the states, which is the Article 5 convention, where 2/3 of the states trigger a meeting where you can draft amendment or amendments and then send to the states for ratification. In each case, though, Mark, because there's a lot of fear-mongering about Article 5, in each case, the ratification is the same. 3/4 of the state legislatures must do it. And so sometimes people say, oh, yeah, I'd love to have a balanced budget requirement. I'd love to have term limits for Congress. But if we did in Article 5, then it would be a, quote, runaway convention, and they could take away the Second Amendment. Just understand, what you're saying is that you would think 3/4 of the states would actually ratify something like that. That would not happen. I think we all know that. The founders set a very high bar for ratification. But I think on these bread and butter things, like term limits, like balanced budget, I think you'd get a lot of support across the country. And the founders set it up this way for a reason, because they knew sometimes the capital, the federal capital, would be the problem with Congress and the power that would be accumulating. And obviously President Trump's done a lot of yeoman's work to try to break up the big administrative state. But this happened over many, many decades. And I'm just not convinced that the current situation with the current Congress and the incentives that are there, we're ultimately going to be able to get the job done without constitutional reform. So you've been a big outspoken proponent. In Florida, we've certified everything possible that people talk about across all these different issues, and I know other states are doing it, and it is gaining momentum because I think people understand. I mean, ultimately, we're not powerless in this. We can act through the states. The states created the federal government, not the other way around. There is no reason why states can't lead on amending the Constitution as the founders provided for.
So well said, Governor. The biggest obstacle in many respects is psychological. People don't understand that this country was founded by states, and they created the federal government. And so the propaganda, the indoctrination, the education over these decades is the all-powerful federal government when it was supposed to be the other way around. And the states have this power, don't they? Because George Mason said, what happens if Congress is corrupt? Your point. He said, what happens? Congress isn't going to fix itself. There has to be another way. So 3 days before the end of the Constitutional Convention, they added this language. And, Convention of States, I wrote a book on it. We're pushing it. We're getting truly great statesmen like you and others to get behind this movement and so forth. And even when Donald Trump leaves, and even if look what's happening in your state. Look at how all these Lilliputians come forward, and all of a sudden they want to change everything and so forth. The key thing you said is structural change the constitutional way, not through judges and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm very practical on this. Having been governor, I did serve a few terms in the U.S. Congress. I fully recovered from that experience, but I did do it, and I learned a lot there. But basically, most of the people that get elected for office are not what you and I would consider to be true believers. They're kind of politicians. They got into it for whatever reason, and so they're going to respond to the incentives that are in front of them. And right now, the incentives in Congress are to get reelected as many times as possible, and ultimately, in order to do that, you don't want to make tough decisions that may create opposition to you. So, of course, you're going to prefer to put spending on the credit card rather than reduce spending, because when you reduce spending, there's some people that get upset about that. So those are just the incentives. And yes, maybe you elect a bunch of statesmen in one election, but the reality is over the medium and long term, even if somehow you did that, it would revert back to what we've seen. If you have term limits, people know, hey, I'm only going to be here 3 terms, 4 terms, whatever it is, maybe 2 terms in the Senate, and then a balanced budget requirement. I got to make tough choices here. We can't keep bankrupting the country. It just changes the way people would approach it. I think it would change some of the people that may not be willing to run for office. I think you get some quality people that would want to go in under different circumstances. And so I'm just a big believer that most of these folks are going to do what's in their immediate self-interest. Just as James Madison said, enlightened statesmen are not always going to be at the helm, so you got to provide the incentives there to get better outcomes.
We're here with Governor DeSantis. So Governor DeSantis, Iran, you see what they're doing, you see the negotiation. What is your take on this? What's your attitude towards this?
Well, I was in Congress. I was the chairman of the National Security Subcommittee back when Obama was trying to do the Iran deal, and I think we were all unified in condemning that deal because he was basically paving the way for Iran to require a nuclear weapon. And I thought back to my time serving in Iraq. I think I'm one of the only few governors who actually served in uniform. But when I was over there during kind of the troop surge in 2007, most of the casualties that U.S. forces were suffering were at the hands of these Iranian-backed militias, and they were responsible for killing hundreds of Americans, probably over 1,000 American troops in Iraq. Of course, they were responsible for the Beirut bombing that killed over 240 service members at the Marine Corps barracks, and they have been very consistent in their view that the United States is the great Satan. So Iran is really the number one problem with the Middle East, and I think President Trump's first term, he did a brilliant job of letting it be known in the Middle East he was going to be supportive of Israel, he was going to turn the screws on Iran, and even when he did things that the Arab countries didn't like correctly recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, they saw that as a president acting with strength, and they gravitated to the West, and they basically created the Abraham Accords and a coalition to keep Iran in a box. And I think that is really the same approach will work now. Trying to cut a deal with Iran, I think, is hazardous. I don't see them as being good faith actors in any way, shape, or form. And the reality is they cannot be allowed to enrich uranium. Period. End of story. They are a militant Islamic government. Their view of mutual destruction with nuclear weapons is actually something they think would be fine because they think they're all going to go to heaven and paradise if that happens. And so the Middle East right now, you have a strong ally in Israel, both with the government and with the populace. Most of the other places in the Arab world, I think, are maybe moderately leaning west. A lot of them are because they recognize President Trump's strength. But underneath all that, most of the population in those countries, they want Sharia law. So if you look at the whole region, Israel is the only country that we have shared values with, and you can trace back the history of Western civilization all the way back to the ancient state of Israel and the birth of both Judaism and Christianity. And we wouldn't have the United States of America if it didn't trace back to that. So the security arrangements are positive. We have great economic ties with Israel. They're a very good diplomatic ally, but on a more foundational level, they are the only place in that region that we have common cause with.
That's very profoundly stated. My buddy Joel Pollack over at Breitbart, he wrote this today. The idea that Iran should never have nuclear weapons is a repeat of the Obama-Biden policy, famously exposed in the Biden-Ryan vice presidential debates in 2012. The Republican position, which sounds like your position, which remains sensible, was that Iran should not have any nuclear enrichment at all, period. Because the only reason they want to do that, Governor, is so they have the capacity to make a bomb. They don't need nuclear enrichment for domestic energy, correct?
That's right. And they are not a traditional country like when we had the Soviet Union. You could deter the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union knew if they used a nuclear weapon, we would respond, and then it'd be mutually assured destruction. That was not very appealing to a country that was based on atheism. Well, when you talk about the Iranian mullahs, they think that nuking Israel, even if they had to take nukes in response, they think they're doing the will of Allah, and that is a much different calculation. It's not clear they would be able to be deterred, and I think they probably wouldn't be able to be in the conventional way, in the traditional way. So you cannot have a militant Islamic state with a nuclear weapon, especially one that views the United States of America as the great Satan.
Now, you're a lawyer. You were a good lawyer, congressman, governor. Let me ask you this. When you have a party that'll sign basically any agreement and has violated every agreement that it has signed, no matter who the other party is, it could be Europe, could be the United States, could be the UN and so forth, why would we believe that anything they signed today would last beyond President Trump? I'm thinking of North Korea. North Korea signed deals. Un's father signed them too, for almost 20 years. And we even removed our nuclear weapons from South Korea as an example of our willingness to work with them. And then all of a sudden it's, look what we have. They have nuclear weapons. I mean, I think Iran is doing the same rope-a-dope as North Korea did.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, if you think back to Trump's first term, he came in, he ripped up the Iran deal that Obama did, which we all said was a disaster, and he turned the screws on them economically. I mean, he imposed some really significant sanctions, and I'm not a guy that thinks sanctions tend to work very well, but in this case, he really did choke their economy in an effective way. That's what happens. When you have a party like that would never abide by an agreement, you just, every time they move, you go a little stronger, you turn it more and more and more. They're only going to respect strength. They will absolutely not be a good faith negotiating partner. And I think their view is, because Qatar is now trying for good relations with the United States, which is an ally of theirs, I think that they can spin this diplomatically in a way where they're going to be able to pull the rug out from under the United States and the West if we went down this road. So I don't think you can do a deal with them that would be enforceable.
Let me ask you this question. Let me put it to you this way. We've seemed to have gotten away from, you're a constitutionalist and I am, the treaty clause of the Constitution. We have administrations of both parties that just blow it off. The Republican Congress, when Obama was there, they basically let him blow it off. But they still had these executive agreements where they still required both houses, oddly enough, to have some statutory authority and so forth and so on. And I've been saying, number one, it is a treaty. If this isn't a treaty, then what the hell is? If they have, and number two, at a minimum, even an executive agreement, you have to have the involvement of Congress. The framers didn't want one person, putting Donald Trump aside. Could be Joe Biden, could be Obama, whomever. The argument that was made by Republicans was, and including Rubio, this is a treaty. And now, if we have to go with an executive agreement, then we need a statutory framework with this. The bottom line is this: shouldn't the Senate or at least Congress be involved in this process too? Because it is life and death.
I think it should be submitted. Anything should be submitted as a treaty and requires 2/3 votes. So some of the things I've been the most opposed to, like the Paris Climate Accords, my view was submit it to the Senate. Let's put them on record, because we knew they wouldn't get 2/3 vote. This WTO lockdown treaty, I'm very much opposed to that. We banned that in Florida, but send it to the Senate. Make them go on record. They would probably vote it down 2-1. So in this Iran thing, I am skeptical, though, even about doing both houses in some type of executive.
Oh, I agree.
I agree. You remember during Obama, they did this Corker thing where you voted no, and then it triggered this. It was strange what they did, and it was a really weird thing, and they did that to get around the treaty clause. So I don't think that works either. If you do a deal with Iran, I think it's incumbent that the president submit that to the Senate or any of these agreements as a treaty. When it involves diplomatic and military issues, the founders, I think, would have been unanimous that it should be considered as a treaty.
And not only are you right, and this is my position as well, it was the Republican position under Obama, even though they eventually sold out. And you make a very important point. It's a 2/3 vote of the senators present. So they made any treaty very difficult. They wanted the full body politic to get behind us. And why? They told us why. They were concerned agreements might wind up in us conferring our sovereignty, the consent of the governed. Overseas, they were afraid of corruption. They told us they were afraid of all these things. And so they actually, in the Constitution, as you know, Governor, I'm just explaining to the public, they changed in this respect separation of powers. They said, the president negotiates, but the Senate has to approve it or turn it down.
And just think of what we just went through for 4 years. It's even, you have staffers negotiating some agreement with the foreign power, then auto-penning Biden's name, and then that's going to bind the country without the Senate. There were a lot of circumstances that they understood you needed that to confer legitimacy on these agreements. And, Biden's condition is probably an extreme case throughout American history, maybe Woodrow Wilson towards the end of his term, but still having somebody like an Obama who was very reckless in foreign affairs, you needed to have that submitted to the Senate. It's also just healthy to be reviewing these agreements, having sunlight on them, let the public know what is the United States committing towards here. So I think it needs to be a treaty, and I think if it's not, then I don't think that it would ultimately carry the day with the legal force necessary.
I also think, Governor, that the administration should be involving the Senate right now, because if it's something that is of immediate concern and import, you don't wait after 5 weeks of negotiation to say, this is what we have. In other words... Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And that's the same thing. I mean, just like when you're trying to do regular legislation as well. I mean, you can propose things, but you got to get the ducks lined up, and people can raise red flags about things. And when you're talking about a 2/3, anything President Trump submits, most likely every Democrat would be inclined to vote no matter what, just because they want to just spite him. So you don't even really have a path to 2/3, perhaps, on any treaty with any country, not even talking about this situation. But to the extent some Democrats would be, you got to look at, can you get all the Republicans? And we've got a wide variety of views over there. So I think it's constitutionally the right way to go and the appropriate way, but I think also just practically it makes sense to do it.
By the way, I saw Mike Lee agrees with us, and there's going to be other senators who agree with us, too. I don't know who they are. I assume Cruz will want to jump in, maybe Rand Paul, some of the others. But the language in the treaty clause is some of the broadest language in the Constitution, period. Period. It's not complicated, but they've made it complicated over the last 80 years or so because of what you said. Presidents trying to defy it of both parties. Just, it's an executive arrangement, which is exactly the opposite of what the framers wanted. In any event, Governor, are the Lilliputians still giving you trouble in Florida? Maybe I should focus more on that.
Well, we'll let you know. So they ended the regular session with no budget, largely because of the leadership in the Florida House. And so we are now about a month away from the end of our fiscal year, and I've never seen them not be able to do a budget before in my time, and usually we get it done right on time. So that was probably to be expected when you see how they're doing. It's interesting, Mark, because I know you got to run, but they just did a map of all the law enforcement agencies across the country who have 287G deportation agreements with ICE. And it's like the whole United States is practically bare. The state of Florida just covered in dots because I fought them and won on the illegal immigration so that we would make local law enforcement work with ICE. And now we're leading the way by a country mile over that. But that was back in January. I was on your radio program. You saw what they were trying to do in the House by trying to do this amnesty bill. And we won because there was a lot of outrage. But we have the biggest Republican majorities we've ever had in the Florida House. I obviously won the biggest victory any Republicans ever won in a governor's race. We've been the model for success across the country on conservative policy by far. And yet, you got some of these guys that just want to sabotage it. I think what happens is when a state goes one party, like we have in Florida, from a Democrat advantage when I got elected to 1.3 million Republican advantage, I think you have people that get involved in Republican who really smuggle their leftism through the Republican Party because they know that they can't get elected as a Democrat given how red the state's gotten. And that's going to be a constant battle that we're going to be fighting in the years ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're welcome here anytime. I think what you've done in this state is unbelievable. And other governors, I think, would learn well from it. So God bless you, my friend. Always enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks, Mark.